3 villagers saw the same woman standing in the middle of an empty field. None of them were ever the same again. Hello everyone, how are you all doing? Let me know in the comments. You're watching Hello District File. Now, let's begin today's story. This incident was sent to us by a viewer from India. It happened to his father, and according to the locals, the place still carries the dark history of what happened there. It all began on a chilly evening. Winter hadn't fully arrived yet, but a thin layer of mist had already started covering the village after sunset. The narrow dirt road stretched through the village, surrounded by dense bamboo groves. In the distance, a few oil lamps flickered outside isolated houses. Once night fell, an eerie silence settled over the entire area. To the west of the village lay a vast open field known as Bhushundi Field. Everyone had heard the name since childhood, but no one knew why it was called that. Strangely, despite its mysterious name, there had never been any ghost stories about the place. Villagers had crossed that road late at night for years. Fishermen returned home after midnight, workers came back from duty, and guests walked home after family gatherings. Nothing unusual had ever happened. Until about 10 days ago. That's when everything changed. The first incident happened to Bilas, the village's well-known sweet maker. People from several nearby villages ordered sweets from him for weddings, rice ceremonies, and other celebrations. One night, after finishing work at a family ceremony in a neighboring village, Bilas began riding home on his bicycle. It was around 11:30 p.m. The cold breeze brushed against his face as he quietly hummed an old tune to himself. Suddenly, one of the sweet boxes hanging from his bicycle handle slipped off and landed in the mud. Damn it! He stopped his bicycle, climbed down and picked it up. A little mud had splashed onto the package. My wife is definitely going to scold me for this, he muttered with a faint smile. He placed the box back into the bag and was just about to continue his ride. Then he froze. A strange sound drifted out from the middle of the field. Slowly, he looked toward the darkness. Nothing. Only thick mist. He shook his head. I'm imagining things. He got back on his bicycle, but this time the sound became clearer. It was the soft jingling of anklets, as if someone was slowly walking across the wet grass. An uneasy feeling crept into Bilas's chest. He slowed down. Then, the sound came from right beside his ear. He slammed on the brakes and turned around. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the middle of the field stood a woman dressed entirely in white. Her long black hair covered her face. She wasn't moving. She wasn't walking. Yet the sound of anklets continued to echo through the night. Then Bilas realized something horrifying. She wasn't standing still anymore. She was slowly gliding toward him, without taking a single step. Oh God. He didn't wait another second. Leaving his bicycle behind, Bilas ran as fast as he could back to the village. The next morning, several villagers went to the edge of Bhushundi Field. His bicycle was still lying there, exactly where he had abandoned it. Even then, many people refused to believe his story. If you love your parents, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below.
3 days after Bilas's terrifying encounter, another frightening incident shook the village. This time, it happened to Fatik, a local fisherman. Fatik often returned home late at night after fishing in the nearby wetlands. On that particular night, it was around 1 a.m. A damp fishing net rested on his shoulder, and fresh fish were still wriggling inside it. The entire village was asleep. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. As Fatik reached the road beside Bhushundi Field, he suddenly heard a voice behind him. Hey, Fatik, taking those fish home? Won't you give me one? He frowned and looked around. Who's there? Don't joke around at this hour. Receiving no reply, he continued walking. A few moments later, the voice came again. This time, much closer. Just one fish? That's all I want. A chill ran down his spine. Without wasting another second, Fatik switched on his flashlight and pointed it behind him. The beam barely pierced through the thick fog. No one was there, only the endless darkness of the field. Trying to ignore it, he quickened his pace. Then, a low, unsettling laugh echoed through the night. Fatik stopped dead in his tracks. His flashlight trembled violently in his hand. At the very edge of the light, he saw a tall, shadowy figure standing motionless. Its head was tilted unnaturally to one side, as if its neck had been broken. Who's there? No answer. The figure remained perfectly still. Then, without moving its body, it slowly turned its head toward him. Fatik's fishing net slipped from his hand. He didn't look back again. He ran with every ounce of strength he had, while that eerie laughter continued to follow him through the darkness. From that night onward, fear spread throughout the village. People who had once laughed at Bylas's story no longer found it amusing. Something was hiding in Bhushundi Field. And whatever it was beginning to reveal itself. Haripada's terrifying encounter after Bylas and Fatik's terrifying experiences, the villagers became genuinely frightened. But the most horrifying encounter of all happened to Haripada. Haripada worked as a security guard at a nearby cold storage facility. His shift lasted from 6 p.m. until 2 a.m., and almost every night he rode his bicycle home alone. That night was no different. A thick blanket of fog covered the road, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. As he reached the road beside Bhushundi Field, his bicycle chain suddenly slipped off. Damn it! He sighed in frustration. After working all night, this was the last thing he needed. He parked the bicycle, crouched down, and began fixing the chain. The entire area was silent. Only the distant sound of crickets broke the stillness. As he hurried to put the chain back on, he suddenly stopped. It sounded as though someone had stepped onto the wet ground nearby. He looked around carefully. Nothing. It must be a fox. He returned to fixing the chain. Then the sound came again, closer this time. Haripada frowned. Annoyed, he grabbed his flashlight and pointed it toward the direction of the noise. Nothing. Only thick fog. Shaking his head, he bent down once more. His hands were now covered in mud. Finally, after struggling for several minutes, he managed to put the chain back on. Just as he stood up, his heart nearly stopped. Right in front of his bicycle stood a woman dressed entirely in white. Her long hair completely covered her face. Her head hung unnaturally to one side, as though her neck had been broken. Haripada's flashlight slipped from his hand. It hit the ground, and the beam briefly illuminated her face. Through the strands of hair, he saw two hollow, pitch-black eyes staring directly at him. Then, a horrifying laugh echoed across the entire field. Haripada screamed. Without thinking for even a second, he abandoned his bicycle and ran for his life. As he raced through the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing him. Something was only a few steps behind. That night changed him forever. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the burned face of the woman. Those empty black eyes seemed to be watching him from every corner of the darkness. By the next evening, Haripada realized he could no longer bear the fear alone. There was only one person in the village who might have answers. An old tantric named Bhavesh, who lived beside the ancient cremation ground at the edge of the village. After sunset, almost no one dared to visit that place. An enormous banyan tree stood over the cremation ground. The air carried the smell of damp ashes and burnt wood. The entire place felt unnaturally heavy. As Haripada approached the small hut, dusk was settling in. A sacred fire burned quietly outside. Its reddish glow flickered across the tantric's face, making him appear strangely mysterious. Bhavesh sat cross-legged on the ground, holding a brass bowl filled with water. His eyes were closed as he quietly chanted ancient mantras under his breath. Haripada stepped closer. Baba! There was no response. The old tantric continued chanting. A few moments later, without even opening his eyes, he spoke in a calm voice. The smell is still with you. Haripada's heart skipped a beat. What smell? Bhavesh slowly opened his eyes. A faint smile appeared on his face. The smell of burned flesh. Haripada's throat went dry. The horrifying image of the woman in white flashed through his mind once again. How did you know that? He whispered. Bhavesh didn't answer immediately. He placed one hand over the brass bowl, closed his eyes, and began chanting in a low, rhythmic voice. Om Kal Bhairav, Om Mahakal, protector of the lost souls, reveal the truth. As the chanting grew louder, the sacred fire suddenly flared up. Its flames rose high into the air. A freezing sensation spread through Haripada's body. Then, Bhavesh slowly opened his eyes and stared directly at him. Without warning, he scooped up a handful of water from the brass bowl and splashed it across Haripada's face. Startled, Haripada stepped backward, but almost instantly, the crushing weight that had been pressing against his chest began to disappear. He took a deep breath. For the first time since that terrifying night, he felt slightly relieved. Bhavesh continued staring at him. I thought so. The shadow followed you all the way here. Haripada felt every drop of blood drain from his face. Hey, shadow? The old tantric tossed another piece of dry wood into the sacred fire. The flames crackled loudly. You saw the woman, he paused. But did you see the man standing beside her? Haripada froze. He had never mentioned seeing anyone. He hadn't even told the old man what had happened. How do you know all this? Bhavesh smiled faintly. There are truths that should never be spoken aloud. Silence filled the hut. Only the crackling fire could be heard. After a long pause, Bhavesh finally spoke again. So, after all these years, they have finally awakened. Haripada stared at him in confusion. What do you mean? I've walked past Bhushundi Field for years. Nothing ever happened before. Why now? The old tantric slowly looked into the dancing flames. His voice became calm, almost sorrowful. Because they were bound. He watched the smoke rise into the night sky before continuing. But on the night of the great new moon, the seal that imprisoned them was broken. A cold wind swept past the hut. Haripada felt another chill run through his body. Bhavesh lowered his voice. Listen carefully, Haripada. What I'm about to tell you happened more than a century ago. The place you now call Bhushundi Field was never a field. It was once home to a magnificent mansion known as Bhushundi Mahal. The old tantric paused. The firelight reflected in his eyes. Then he began telling the forgotten history. It was the year 1868. British rule had tightened its grip across the region. The indigo planters and wealthy landlords ruled with fear. Bhushundi Mahal was one of the grandest estates in the area. From the outside, it looked like a palace. It had fountains, flower gardens, carved balconies, and enormous halls. But behind those beautiful walls, darkness lived. Every night, lavish gatherings were held inside the mansion. Powerful landlords, wealthy merchants, and British officers drank, celebrated, and watched young women perform. And among all those performers, one girl was admired above everyone else. Her name was Chandrabati. She was only 17 or 18 years old. People said that once she began dancing, no one could take their eyes off her. She had long black hair, graceful movements, and the delicate sound of silver anklets that echoed through the dance hall. But behind her beauty, she carried unbearable sorrow. As a child, she had been sold to the mansion. She had no family, no home, no freedom. She lived only to entertain strangers. And every night, she silently dreamed of a life she could never have. Not far from Bhushundi Mahal lived a humble Brahmin family. Their only son was Aniruddha. Unlike most young men in the village, Aniruddha was quiet and deeply devoted to his studies. He spent his days reading ancient scriptures, helping his father with religious rituals, and teaching local children whenever he could. But he had one unusual habit. Every night, after the village had fallen asleep, he would walk alone to the riverbank, carrying nothing but his bamboo flute. There, beneath the endless sky, he would sit in silence and play melodies that no one had ever heard before. His music carried neither joy nor sorrow. Yet anyone who listened to it felt an indescribable peace. One night, while the celebrations inside Bhushundi Mahal were still echoing through the halls, Chandrabati heard that flute for the very first time. She stopped dancing. The melody drifted through the cold night air like a whisper. For years, she had known only cruelty, greed, drunken laughter, and endless humiliation. But this music, it was different. It touched a place inside her heart that she thought had died long ago. From that night onward, she found herself waiting for the sound. Every evening, she silently counted the hours until the flute began to play again. Eventually, her curiosity became stronger than her fear. One misty night, she quietly slipped out through the back gate of the mansion and followed the melody to the river. There she saw him. A young man sat beneath a tree with his eyes closed, completely lost in his music. When Aniruddha noticed her standing there, he immediately became nervous. Everyone knew that respectable villagers never spoke to the dancers from Bhushundi Mahal. If anyone saw them together, both of them would be in terrible danger. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Chandrabati broke the silence. "Are you the one who plays that flute every night?" Aniruddha nodded shyly. "Yes. Your music makes me forget where I live." That was all they said that night. Yet somehow, it was enough. Soon, their meetings became a secret tradition. Sometimes they sat beside the river talking for hours. Sometimes Aniruddha played his flute while Chandrabati simply closed her eyes and listened. Other nights they spoke very little at all. They simply enjoyed each other's company beneath the stars. For the first time in her life, Chandrabati met someone who looked into her eyes instead of looking at her body. And for the first time, Aniruddha saw beyond the expensive jewelry and beautiful clothes. He saw a lonely soul longing to be loved. Without realizing it, they slowly fell in love. One evening, Chandrabati smiled and whispered, "You know, if I don't hear your flute, I can't fall asleep anymore." Aniruddha laughed softly. "Then I'll play it every night." "For how long?" "For the rest of my life." Hearing those words, tears filled Chandrabati's eyes. No one had ever promised her forever before. One cold night beside the river, she quietly asked, "Will you take me away from here?" Aniruddha didn't hesitate. "Yes, where?" "Somewhere no one knows your name. Somewhere we can begin again." For a long moment, Chandrabati rested her head on his shoulder. "I never want to go back to that mansion." "You won't have to." That night, for the first time since childhood, she cried in someone's arms. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time, she believed she might finally be free. From that day forward, Aniruddha and Chandrabati knew they could no longer remain in the village. Every secret meeting carried the risk of being discovered. Still, neither of them was willing to give up. One evening, as they sat by the river, Chandrabati looked at him with frightened eyes. "They'll never let us be together." Aniruddha gently took her hand. "I won't let anyone hurt you." "But you don't know these people." "I don't care. I only know that I love you." For a brief moment, the world around them disappeared. There was no mansion, no landlord, no British officers, no cruel society, only two people dreaming of a life they could never have. Soon, they made a plan. On the night of the new moon, when darkness covered the village, they would escape. Aniruddha secretly saved what little money he could. He arranged for an ox cart to be waiting on the other side of the river before dawn. Once they crossed the river, they would leave everything behind and begin a new life far away. For days, they lived only for that night. Finally, the night arrived. The sky was completely black. Not a single star could be seen. A thick blanket of fog covered the roads. Holding each other's hands tightly, Chandrabati and Aniruddha quietly slipped out through the back of Bhushundi Mahal. Every step they took brought them closer to freedom. Then, a loud shout shattered the silence. "There they are! They're escaping!" One of the mansion guards had seen them. Within seconds, the entire estate erupted into chaos. Torches lit up the darkness. Footsteps thundered across the courtyard. "Run!" Aniruddha shouted. The two of them ran with all their strength, but they didn't get far. Several guards surrounded them. Aniruddha fought desperately to protect Chandrabati. He was beaten again and again, but he refused to let go of her hand. Blood streamed down his face. Still, he kept shouting, "Please, don't hurt her! She's done nothing wrong." The guards ignored his pleas. Chandrabati struggled desperately, crying uncontrollably. "Please stop! Please don't kill him!" No one listened. They were dragged through the courtyard and taken behind the mansion to a large open ground. Dozens of people had already gathered there. The landlord stood silently, watching. Several British officers looked on with cold, emotionless faces. Many villagers had been forced to witness what was about to happen. Not one of them dared to speak. Not one dared to intervene. Aniruddha and Chandrabati were tied together with thick ropes. Even then, their hands found each other. Chandrabati looked into his eyes. Softly, through her tears, she whispered, "If there is another life, find me again." Aniruddha rested his forehead against hers. "I will. No matter where you are, I will always find you. Those were the last words they ever spoke to each other. Moments later, the execution began. Bundles of dry wood were piled around Aniruddha and Chandrabati. The ropes that bound them together tightened as the guards stepped back. The entire courtyard fell into a heavy silence. Only the crackling of burning torches could be heard. Neither of them begged for mercy. Neither tried to save themselves anymore. They simply held each other's hands. The landlord gave a slow nod. Without hesitation, one of the guards lowered his torch onto the pile of wood. At first, thin streams of smoke curled into the night sky. Then, the dry wood caught fire. Within moments, towering flames surrounded the young couple. The heat became unbearable. The villagers watched in horror. Some lowered their heads, others quietly wept. But no one dared to stop what was happening. As the flames grew higher, Chandrabati cried out in unbearable pain. Aniruddha pulled her as close as he could, shielding her with his own body, even though he knew there was no escape. Still, he never let go of her hand. The fire consumed everything around them. Yet even inside the roaring flames, the two lovers remained together. Then something impossible happened. Just as Chandrabati's final scream echoed through the night, a violent storm suddenly swept across the estate. Powerful winds howled through the courtyard. One by one, the burning torches were blown out. The sky darkened even further. Many of the people standing there later swore they had seen something terrifying. Inside the wall of fire, the silhouettes of Aniruddha and Chandrabati were still standing. Their hands were locked together. Even death had failed to separate them. From that night onward, Bhushundi Mahal was never the same. At first, people dismissed the strange incidents as fear and imagination, but the unexplained events continued. Late at night, the sound of anklets echoed through the empty dance hall. Sometimes, a sorrowful flute melody drifted across the river, even though no one was there. Servants claimed they had seen the burned figure of a young woman standing silently on the mansion balcony. Others spoke of two shadowy figures holding hands inside walls of ghostly fire behind the mansion. The landlord refused to believe any of it. He accused his servants of spreading lies. Some were beaten for speaking about the hauntings. But fear could not be silenced. Within weeks, tragedy struck inside the mansion itself. One servant was found hanging from the ceiling of the dance hall. Another fled into the village screaming in terror. He kept repeating the same horrifying words over and over again. They're walking. They're still burning. Soon after that, two British officers who had witnessed the execution also died under mysterious circumstances. One of them was discovered lying in the courtyard behind the mansion. His entire body had been burned black. Yet strangely, there wasn't the slightest sign of fire anywhere around him. That was the moment people realized something had awakened inside Bhushundi Mahal. Something that refused to forgive. Something that refused to rest. Fear spread across the entire region. After sunset, no one dared to go anywhere near Bhushundi Mahal. The once glorious mansion stood abandoned, its halls filled with silence and whispers that no one could explain. Night after night, people reported hearing strange sounds. The soft jingling of anklets echoed through the empty dance hall. A mournful flute drifted across the river, even though there was no musician in sight. Sometimes, the unmistakable smell of burned flesh filled the air without warning. The landlord tried everything to stop the rumors, but the deaths continued. Servants disappeared. Guards abandoned their posts. Even the bravest men refused to spend a single night inside the mansion. Desperate and terrified, the landlord sought help from a powerful tantric saint from the sacred land of Tarapith. No one knew the holy man's real name. People simply called him Bhairav Sadhu. The moment Bhairav Sadhu entered Bhushundi Mahal, he said nothing. He walked slowly through every corridor, every room, and every courtyard. Occasionally, he knelt to touch the ground. Sometimes he closed his eyes, as though listening to voices that no one else could hear. Finally, he stopped behind the mansion, at the exact spot where Aniruddha and Chandrabati had been burned alive. For several minutes, he remained completely still. Then he opened his eyes and spoke in a calm but heavy voice. A terrible injustice was committed here. The landlord stepped forward nervously. "Can you stop this?" Bhairav Sadhu looked toward the scorched earth before answering. They never found peace. They were bound by betrayal, pain, and injustice. Until those wounds are healed, they will continue to wander. That very night, the tantric began an ancient ritual. A sacred boundary was drawn around the entire mansion. Holy ash, vermilion, and blessed water were scattered across the ground. Powerful mantras echoed through the darkness until dawn. As the ritual continued, terrifying sounds filled the night. A woman crying, a man screaming in agony, the haunting melody of a broken flute, the jingling of anklets circling the mansion. Some villagers later swore that the earth itself trembled before sunrise. Then, without warning, everything became silent. The cries vanished. The flute stopped. Even the wind stood still. At daybreak, Bhairav Sadhu emerged from the mansion. His face was pale with exhaustion. He looked at the frightened villagers and spoke only one warning. They can no longer leave this place. But remember my words. If this sacred seal is ever broken, they will return. Years passed, then decades. Eventually, more than a century slipped away. The British Empire fell. India gained its independence. The landlord's family disappeared. Bhushundi Mahal slowly crumbled into ruins. Rain, storms, and time reduced the once magnificent mansion to dust. In the end, nothing remained except an empty stretch of land. People eventually forgot there had ever been a mansion there. The place became known simply as Bhushundi Field. Children played there during the day. Farmers crossed it on their way home. Travelers used the road without fear. The old legend faded with each passing generation. Only the name survived. No one remembered the lovers. No one remembered the fire. No one remembered the curse. Until the seal finally broke. Haripada sat frozen, unable to say a word. The old tantric slowly reached beside him and picked up a small black cloth pouch tied with a red thread. Closing his eyes, he began chanting ancient mantras under his breath. After a few moments, he gently blew over the charm and placed it into Haripada's trembling hands. "Keep this with you at all times," Bhavesh said quietly. "No matter what happens, never take it off." Haripada nodded. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the charm. Just then, a powerful gust of icy wind swept through the doorway. The sacred fire flared violently, casting long dancing shadows across the walls. Both men fell silent. Then, from somewhere deep within the darkness, a faint sound echoed through the night. Jingle, jingle. The unmistakable sound of silver anklets. Haripada's face turned pale. His heartbeat pounded inside his chest. A few seconds later, another sound drifted across the wind. A lonely bamboo flute. Its melody was slow, broken, and filled with unbearable sorrow. The haunting tune seemed to carry the pain of two souls who had waited for justice for more than a century. Bhavesh slowly closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They have awakened." No one spoke again. Only the flute continued to play somewhere beyond the darkness. From that night on, the people of the village refused to travel past Bhushundi Field after sunset. Travelers claimed they sometimes heard anklets moving through the fog, even though no one was there. Others swore they had seen a woman in white standing silently in the middle of the field. And on certain moonless nights, if the wind was perfectly still, a broken flute melody could still be heard drifting across the empty land. Some believe it is the voice of two lovers who never found peace. Others believe they are still searching for the justice that was stolen from them long ago. Whether the legend is true, no one can say for certain. But if you ever find yourself walking alone near an abandoned field late at night and you hear the sound of anklets behind you, don't look back. Because some stories never truly end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more terrifying stories. Now here's one final question. Would you dare to walk through Bhushundi Field alone at midnight? Let me know your answer in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.